Hi, and welcome to the Code Chameleon podcast. I'm Stefan Jorgensen, your host today. I've been pondering to make this podcast for a while. I thought that I had a lot of many interesting ideas, and a lot of people who have even more interesting ideas. So, what better way to kind of get that out there with using this podcast as a platform? The general idea is that I have a guest, and we have a good laid back discussion about a subject. Today, we're talking about clean code with a super interesting guy. So I really hope that you enjoy it. And of course, leave feedback if you have any questions or any other interesting input. So the guest today, he's a firm believer in clean code, and he's a really, really great guy. He likes hyper sweet sugar drinks, and I'm sure that he can tell you a lot about that in a minute. He has an absolutely outstanding attention to detail. The way that he can kind of zoom in on code and zoom out again is really impressive. And he loves a good argument, and so that I hope that we can see that today as well. He works at MobilePay in a small team called Account Payments, and he can tell a little bit more about that in a moment. He used to be a game developer actually, and he actually does a little bit still in his spare time. And apart from that, he's a very very good table tennis player, and he's an all round great guy. Please welcome Lucas Adelholm. Hi Lucas, how are you?
Hey, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, nice to see you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. I hope you didn't hype me up too much there, but
Oh, max hype, max hype, max hype. I've been really looking forward to this, Lucas. This is the first episode, as you know, so I hope you don't mind that I kind of fumble around with the techie stuff, but hopefully we'll get there.
I'm sure I will too. I'm not very well versed in like public speaking and such, so yeah.
You'll do fine. You'll do fine. So we have a small agenda ready for you guys. Before we kind of dig into the clean code stuff, I thought that we should learn Lucas a little bit better to know him. And the first point that I have is actually a point that I would like to call "What's in your office?" And Lucas, do you have something in your office that you think kind of is maybe funny or quirky or really smart or just kind of have a special significance for you?
Well, usually I have way more stuff, all kinds of crap in my office. I'm in like in between offices, so to speak, because I just moved to a new house, and so I don't have a lot of stuff, but I do have like Uh, this maybe you kind of introduced me a little bit to, I would say. My Pepsi. I really like
Yay!
my Pepsi, I guess. But I do water it down for some reason. I like that.
Good. Actually,
Uh,
I must admit today it's been a rough day. I'm a family guy, so it's been a rough day. So actually, I'm on the hyper stuff today.
I can get on that as well.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Uh,
yeah. But I know one quirky thing about you, Lucas. I might have taught you to drink Pepsi Max, but how do you drink it?
yeah, like I said, watered down. Like 1 part water, 2 parts Pepsi.
Oh
No,
my
sorry,
god.
the other way around. Like 1 part Pepsi, 2 parts water.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like the kind of soda you get in movie theaters and such. I don't like
Yeah.
too much fizz. Then I get the hiccups. So
Yeah. Fair
this
enough.
works, and then it lasts way longer. So
That's true. That's true. And it can get expensive if you drink as many Pepsi Max as I do.
yeah,
It's a
and me too
big,
now. God damn it.
big budget thing.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thanks for sharing.
Yep.
So can you tell us a little bit about what you do at Mobile Pay?
Well, I code. We work in C sharp. Um, and we are account payments, and we do like historically we've done account payments like between an account and another account in Denmark mostly, but we're also working on between other countries that we operate in, like Finland and such.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's our domain that we do,
Yeah.
and we also
And so
work a little
just
bit with
if you don't
partners
know
and such.
Mobile Pay in Denmark, that's more or less the de facto way to do peer-to-peer payments. So
Yeah.
if you buy the movie tickets or whatever, you can send me a request for 100 kroner, and I can send you that, and it will use either my credit card or the account to account that you mentioned.
Yeah, and we also
Uh,
have like peer to or person to business as well.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. And I think it's like the penetration in the Danish market is unbelievable. It's like 95% of Danes have it. It's crazy.
I don't remember the word, but yeah, like it's
Very
a
popular. Very,
ubiquitous brand,
yeah,
very popular brand, and
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And branching out at the moment to do more international stuff. So,
yes.
so that's
We
super
merged with
interesting.
with the Norwegian Vipps 2 years ago, and have yeah, that carries a lot of new stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and just for context, Lucas and I have worked together in the same team. I'm a freelance consultant, and I worked with Lucas for, I don't know, a year and a half,
Yeah, that sounds about right.
something like that, right? And actually, just got news this week that I'm going back. So watch out, Lucas. I'll be back very, very soon.
Yes, I'm gonna
Looking
prepare.
very much forward to that because they're a great team and great people there. So definitely a cool place to be.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to it.
Good.
Yeah, we
All right.
always had a lot of good arguments, like you said in the intro. I really like arguing, not just to argue, but
No,
to
like, but it's
uncover.
I mean it in a positive way. You're very
Yeah, yeah,
strong
yes,
in
I know.
arguing, like, yeah. So I
Like
really enjoyed that.
uncovering like challenging ideas and uncovering like faults within or strengths and stuff like that. I really like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. And also just a bit of kudos to you. I think you're very good at kind of realizing if you were in the wrong, either in the moment or later on, that you kind of just go back to some code and you're like, okay, I remember having this argument doing this, but okay, I can see now that that was not the right way to do it. And not many
I I
people do that.
I try to. I think it's a very powerful thing to like separate yourself from the ideas. So if your idea doesn't work out, it's totally cool to just say like I was wrong. Like it happens to me sometimes where I will have suddenly I will just have a change of heart and see like well, this idea that I had that I advocated so strongly for like a month ago. Now I'm gonna like just as powerfully argue against it now because now I see issues with it. And
Right.
sometimes, like for example, one of my colleague Mikkel, my close friend as well, will say like, "Well, you were the one who argued for it." Well, yeah, but now I'm not. Like now I disagree with it. I know it was me, but I've learned more since then. So I think
Yeah.
that's very important thing to learn and yeah,
Yeah, and I think it plays into, like, you really show a lot of integrity. If you're kind of able to say, "Okay, I was wrong. I'm sorry, guys, I was wrong. Let's do it the other way around." It's really a strong like character trait, if you ask me.
thank you.
All right, are you ready for some? Well, I was just about to call it a quiz. It's not a quiz, but just a little funny word game to kind of get to know you a little bit better. So
Yeah, I'll
this
do
is
it
the
again.
segment that I call the binary battle. So the thought is that I will give you two words, and you can choose only one.
All right,
All right, are you ready?
I'm ready.
First up, Mac or PC?
PC, definitely.
PC, only PC.
Yeah, I mean, I do see some strengths with Mac. I like the build quality and some stuff, but I've tried to get into it, but I'm just gonna stick with my PC. Uh, yeah, I mean, I have had a lot of issues with my PC at work, and I have considered like trying to get over to Mac. I'm not completely married to PC, but for now, I'm still gonna stick with my PC.
Yeah. Me too. Me too. Next up, front end or back end?
Oh, sorry. This one is not easy to answer quickly. Backend, I guess. I'm doing backend right now. Can I elaborate a little bit?
Absolutely.
I used to do so much front end when I did games, and I really have a strong like I'm very passionate about the visual presentation of stuff as well, despite me working in backend currently. Um, and I used to do like a lot of the hookup for the front end. Like I wouldn't design the front end. I would critique it if I saw something that I thought didn't make sense and stuff like that. But yeah, I really like at least having a small part in the front end as well if I can. But
Sure.
in
Would you
mobile
say
pay,
that
it's
you're better in the back end or in the front end?
I don't know. I mean, I can't literally can't do like front end when we're talking like websites and stuff like that. I
All right.
haven't
Okay.
done that before. So definitely
Right.
backend is what I can do, but
What
I
was the
really
game
like.
engine that you worked in before?
We worked in Unity. Yeah,
Unity. Right. Okay. Okay. Gotcha.
I've dabbled in other game engines, but Unity is what I know best.
Right. Okay. Okay. The next now we're upping the antes. I'm just
Yes,
putting it out there.
I'll try to be
Next up.
faster as well.
No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We don't have any schedule to kind of adhere to. So next up, tabs or spaces.
Tabs.
Fire.
Yeah, it's just simpler.
Did what is it? Tabs?
Yeah, tabs. It's
Yeah,
simpler.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only correct answer. The only correct answer, guys. Is Mikkel from the team? Is he spaces?
I th- I don't think it's a strong. I don't think there are any like strong arguments here. I don't even think most people notice because even if you do spaces, it's usually like you can get your IDE to do. I don't think there's anyone doing like actual like
I don't think it's
tapping
as important,
spaces.
at least not now in .NET as it was
Yeah,
a few years ago.
yeah. I think it's mostly a dead topic.
Yeah, a little
Maybe
bit
I don't
maybe.
know.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit. But I mean, it's always funny because all developers definitely had like the discussion, right?
Yeah,
At some point
I
in their
think.
career.
Yeah.
All right. So, coffee or energy drink?
Energy drink. I do like coffee. I do drink coffee when I don't have any energy drink.
Right. Okay.
But I prefer like a cold, uh, watered down energy drink. Uh, yeah, it's
Yeah.
just like yeah. Then I get my thirst taken care of, while I also get a little bit of caffeine. So
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
two birds with one stone.
Same for me. I'm also on the energy drink train or the Pepsi Max train. If you see me with a coffee, you know it's been a really rough night, like a double espresso or something.
Yeah, and you don't have any other options.
Right. Right. All right. Bug hunting or feature building?
Uh, Feature building. I mean, bug
Feature
hunting
building
is, yeah, it's just a necessary evil. It's horrible. I mean, yeah,
can be. Yeah.
obviously there's a payoff, but it's a hard and yeah, exhausting process.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Um,
But I
Sometimes.
think you're very good at bug hunting.
I don't know if I'm particularly good, but I
Well,
get
that
better
at
all
least
the time.
that's my opinion. I think you're very good at, as I said in the introduction, that to kind of zoom in and zoom out again, like that, kind of getting that the bird's eye view, and then zooming into to like the that specific line of code that's kind of like, okay, something's wrong here, and yeah,
I
no,
don't feel like I'm a whiz with all the tools you can use for bug hunting, like all the crazy tools you can use with like the debugger and all that.
right,
I'm still pretty low tech when it comes to all that. I'm still learning new things all the time. Um, but it's such a horrible process that all tools that help you do it easier is something that I look into sometimes.
yeah, 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 sure.
Yeah, but it's fun to create new features. Obviously,
Oh
it's
yeah, I agree. I agree. I enjoy that way more. Way more. All right, early bird coder or night owl hacker?
night owl. Yeah,
Yeah,
I like being up late. I mean, yeah, I like it when I'm doing it, but obviously in the morning I hate it because I have children, so I can't sleep in. Um, so yeah, it's horrible being a night owl with children a
yep.
little bit. At least I get
Amen.
some
Amen.
alone time in the
Yeah.
evenings. But uh, but yeah, I hate getting up early. And now it's
Yeah,
just
me too.
my life.
All right. Silent workspace or music while coding.
I like music, but I prefer like music that is just instrumental
Right.
stuff,
No lyrics,
especially
please.
when coding. But in general, it's most of the music I listen to is instrumental.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. All right. And the last one, TDD or YOLO driven?
TDD. But that being said, I'm not like completely on the TDD like uh train like this where you test before doing and all that, but I like having tests. But I hope we get more into this. I have a lot of very, very, very strong opinions when it comes to testing.
I know.
Uh, uh, yeah, I think this is one of the topics where we've clashed maybe the
Right.
most. Um, and it's a very interesting topic, and
I totally
yeah.
agree. I totally agree.
But before
Um,
I worked, like before I worked at MobilePay, I was not very well versed in tests. Always found it boring, but now I find it very very useful.
yeah, I agree. I agree. And I think that we had some. Well, we can get back to that, but I think
Yeah,
just as a small teaser, I think we us two had some really good discussions about tests, and you had some good points where I was like, "Wow, that's really a good point." But let's get back to that because I think it's very
yeah.
interesting to kind of dig into TDD and the back side of the metal, like we say in Danish, with TDD, because there's definitely some things from TDD that you might not want to keep. Let's put it that way.
uh,
But let's get
yeah.
back to that.
Yes.
All
That's
right. So I think we know you a little bit better now. Well, I know you pretty well, Lucas, but our audience at least know you a little bit better. Um, I think let's dive into to Clean Code. And Clean Code is a book written by Robert Martin. And just a small disclaimer before we start, I realized very recently, I told a friend about this podcast that we are doing and talking about Clean Code, and apparently there has been some some scandals around Robert Martin. He has some very strong political opinions that some like and some do not like. I just wanted to put it out there that he is what he is, but I still think that the book is pretty good. Not all of it I agree with, but a lot of it I agree with. So let's just put Robert Martin to the side and not discuss him as a person, but let's discuss the content of the book.
yes.
All right. So Lucas and I spoke earlier about what we wanted to talk about, and we found seven key points that we want to talk a little bit about. Some points maybe a little bit more than others. But the first one that we will talk about is it even a chapter in the book called Total Cost of Owning a Mess, or is it just
Oh,
a part of it? I can't even
I
remember.
don't remember at all because we read the book when I started working at MobilePay, same time when you started, and
Hmm.
my opinions on all this stuff was very different before, and I haven't read it since, and I've just taken it as like um, as a stepping stone, and then develop my own uh, thoughts on top. I don't see it as like a Bible. I see it as inspiration
Sure, I
mostly.
agree. Yeah,
Um, but I find this topic very interesting. I feel like not all people, all developers, like realize this cost. Not everyone has existed in this before. I think maybe it's healthy for some developers to just be thrown into a complete mess to actually understand what it's like. And the scary part is that it happens very slowly most of the time.
yeah,
Um, and you don't see it as you're going there unless you're very careful. It's like the frog, the boiling frog, and all that.
yeah.
Um, and uh, and I've been there. Before I worked at MobilePay, I was at a company, very nice company, but I was working on a project that was developed very fast, and I got thrown into this, and it was a very enlightening experience,
Hmm.
to say it in a nice way. Um, I learned a lot on that project. I think that's why I'm such a strong advocate of clean code. Um, and So I think that's why sometimes I feel a little bit resistance from some developers when it comes to my strong advocacy for like doing things clean, because it's like okay, I can do this thing in this clean way, but it'll take a little bit of extra time. And does it really matter, right? Does it really matter, this little thing here? And
Hmm.
I always say, like, this little thing here in itself, in isolation, it doesn't matter. But it's it's just a little piece of
Yes,
dirt,
like
and the
the
dirt,
compound. Like,
yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah. I totally
it will
agree.
compound and it will get worse. And then you add stuff like what do you call it, like the broken window
Yeah,
principle, where
broken
it's
middle
like you
fallacy. Yeah,
start, yeah, you start seeing things that are not completely up to snuff, and then you don't care about it as much, and then it gets even worse.
yeah.
So
So
I
the
think,
if you don't
yeah,
know the broken window fallacy is basically, I think it's even that, like, someone did like a survey about it. But basically, if you have like an old building in the city where like one window is broken, if you come back to that same building like a year later, all the windows will be broken because people don't care about it. So
yeah,
that's basically what
and
you're
it can
referring to
spread
in the
as
code,
well.
right?
Like, it can spread even out from, like, in the community, I think.
Sure.
Um, that people will say, like, okay, people around here, they don't care about the community, so why should I?
Right.
And yeah, so I
And it's
think,
also interesting because we all know like that situation where I'm doing this code. It has to be a little bit quick. Okay, I'll come back to it later, right?
yeah,
And it's like I think it's called LeBlanc's law or something like that. It's like later equals never, basically. So
yes,
so like you have like the best of intentions, but you will never get back to it. And that's kind of where the code starts to rot and become worse and worse and worse.
yeah, and that's
And
why
I
I
think
am so adamant sometimes. So yeah, I'm so such a strong advocate for even doing the little things right, because
right,
this is what I think will happen.
yeah. And I think that all developers probably know this small cartoon. I think it's from Vincent DNL, who has it. And it's been like, so this is like the business owner's like, I don't understand why it takes so long to add a new window, and it's like the building is just falling apart behind him. And
Yeah.
that's, I think, is a pretty good analogy on like rotten code, basically.
Yes, because now we lead into, like, yeah, the first part we talked about, like, how do you get there? But yeah, why do we try to avoid it? It's because it just gets horrible to work on such a project.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like at my old company, it was like one guy was the guy working on the project, and he kind of knew the ins and outs and stuff. But if a new person like me would come in, it took months to get just a semblance of understanding of what was going on.
Right.
Like, one example was, it was game, and the game had game modes, different game modes, and they were created in such a way that it was a single class that handled the game modes in a very, like, it was like, oh, this function handles this game mode and this function handles this game mode. No, it was a bunch of functions that weaved in and out
Mm-hmm.
between the different game modes, and then had different if statements to figure out, like, oh, what mode am I in? Then I have to do this, and it was a mess. And it took me, I think, literally it took me about a month to refactor that thing, so we could actually easily add new game modes.
Mm-hmm.
And
But in your experience, is it like, what's the worst part? Is it like the business impact, or is it like the developer happiness because it's just so frustrating to work in that mess? What is the
get
worst part with the in your
I mean, I guess if I guess it's the business impact, but it goes hand in hand. If the developer is not is unhappy and feels a lot of headache working on the project, that will come out as business impact.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it's not, if it was just like, oh, the developer's unhappy while doing it, but he can do it just as fast and just as well, then I guess it doesn't matter, right? But in a way, but it's definitely very tightly coupled there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the for me at least, one of the most important points is that we as developers, we have to take responsibility of the code. we have to stand up to the business, because obviously the business, like, we need this and we need this and there's a deadline and blah 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 blah. It's very important that we say we can't do it. We need time to fix this or whatever, because the code is rotting. And that can
Yeah.
be a really hard argument, right? Because usually, like, when the business comes with a new feature request, it's usually some guy with stars on his shoulder, right? A pay grade or two above yourself. But it's very important that you kind of put your heels down and say, no way, we can't do this. We need time to fix this or whatever. It's super important to kind of, yeah,
I
say no.
completely agree, and I don't think I have this down completely yet. I think I'm more like, in general, I'm just working in a way where um, I hope the manager kind of handles the deadline a little bit. I'm just doing the work in a way that I feel like I've been responsible when doing the code in a way. That being said, I mean, you can sometimes skip a little bit. Sometimes, like sometimes there's you're at a crossroads where there's the right way, and then there's a less good way, but it's like way faster. And if you're in a very pressed situation, you could choose the second option here. Um, but you should do it with your eyes open. Um, and I also want to come back to what you said earlier, like this thing where like, yeah, I'm gonna go back and fix this later. Yeah, I'm completely with you on that in regards to this. If I ever hear one of my coworkers say like, "Yeah, we can go back later," I'm like, I know we will not. So either we just accept that this is bad and it will probably stay bad, or we do it the right way and we just take the hit. Um, and I don't want to lessen the cost by just saying, "I will get back to it," because that doesn't happen almost
No.
never. Um, and it's so easy to lie to yourself and just say like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, we'll get." It's so easy. Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Interesting. Okay. Let's move on to number two. That
all
is
right.
meaningful names. Now we're kind of zooming in a little bit. Now we talked about like the broad
Yeah,
consequences of
yeah.
not really doing like high quality work, and like now we're zooming in. And one of the most important things in my world, at least, is like the meaningful names. Can you give your opinion on naming in general?
I completely agree that it's extremely important. Uh, Maybe I'm weird, but the way that I work is that I like to really understand the code that I'm working in. Some developers have sort of a little bit of they can sort of zoom in on a very narrow piece of code and just kind of work in there. But I think it's a little bit dangerous to do it without understanding uh, more of the whole. And here I think naming is also so very important. Like you have the isolated instances where you're like, okay, we need a name that is, yeah, meaningful to what the variable is. But then you have like other things where consistency across a project. Do you like when you want to get some data from somewhere? Do you use get or do you use fetch or do you
Hmm.
use
Yep.
retrieve or so? This is quite important. But then you have like things that are, for example, more domain specific. I've experienced in our some of our code bases where it's like, do you use transfer or do you use like some other word that is like a synonym here? And if you use these different terms across the same project, at least for me, my brain just shuts off.
Hmm.
Um, I would like that the entire flow calls the same thing. Um, and I think it's important. Maybe some person that is very knowledgeable in that code base, they can parse it in their brain. I still believe it will take some extra milliseconds each time, like a double take each time at least in the beginning, and also a little bit later. But I think it's so very important when you get new people in, or if you just come back after a while or something like that. Um, so that's one of the most important things, I think, is consistency. But like you also have, I have my pet peeves here with names. There's so many, like I really dislike when you have a name where there's like a clash with the language that you're using or the general technology. So like calling something something list, for example. Um, or even if you hit like a higher level technology that you're using, like something pod or something, if it doesn't actually relate to that thing, for me, I'm reading it and I'm thinking it's the thing that it's saying it is. And I think this is just dangerous. And again,
Mm.
it's one of these things where in isolation, does it matter? No. But if you
But
keep
like
doing
the
things like
total, yeah,
this,
yeah.
it will just take you longer and longer and longer to understand what's going on, and then it will take you longer to add a
What
window
one
to
of
a
my
house.
pet peeves with regards to naming is class names which includes service, something service. That's like, okay, it's so generic, you
Yes,
know. I mean, if I just have like, I don't know, I can't come up with a good example of something service. Can I explain what is going on? What is the responsibility of this class of a service? Right? It's just
yes.
it's so generic. It might be right, but or maybe it's like the only way to go, but it's just, to me, it's a huge code smell. Like, okay, something, this is like a god class or something that's doing too much.
It
um
definitely comes from often it comes from a class having too much responsibility. Like you said, you can't narrow down what it actually does. I still find it hard to come up with with another name than service sometimes, and I still struggle with why.
yep.
There's yeah, it's very difficult sometimes to come up with a better name, and
But I think
then you
in when I was in with your team last time, we came up with like our own small pattern with the orchestrator, which is
yes,
a better word, because it's like I'm orchestrating like the sequence of events that we want to do. It
but
was
this
a
was a
very
very
high level
specific
component
yes.
that had like a lot of dependencies, like what it had to do, but it was like there was no business logic per se in it. It was just like get data from here, enrich the
Yeah,
data from
the
here,
only
whatever.
business logic was the orchestration of it. Uh,
Yeah,
but that was a very specific one that we didn't just say like all the things we used to call service, now we call it orchestrator. This was a very specific, like, yeah, the high level orchestrator of our
yeah,
flow.
hmm,
Uh, and and I think I always strive to do something similar in other cases. Like if you had something that is reading from the database or something, instead of calling it something something reader reading service, skip the service, just call it something something reader.
hmm,
um, and because that's what it does, and you don't need this extra fluff.
no,
um, it's but this all leads down to, like, when I'm saying sometimes I still call something service, uh, what it says, I remember it saying this in the clean code book, is like sometimes you just gotta kind of try something and then get a feel for it. Um, and then here is the important thing, is that you should not be scared to change it, change the naming.
mm,
Um, and uh, and then you change it from service to some other thing. Um, and yeah, you should be prepared to do that at any time.
yeah. I was trying to kind of get there that it might be you might have a situation where you need a service, but always try to kind of remember the single responsibility principle, right? There should only be one reason for a class to change, and what is the reason in a service, right? It depends on what the service does, but I would definitely think that you're on thin ice if you have a service class.
Yeah, but I can try to come up with an example, like for example, in our domain in mobile pay, like, okay, you wanna actually transfer uh, like actually do the transfer on the back end between the customer and our internal system account. We call that a pay-in. And how do you make like uh, a um, a good name for like the class that actually does that execution of
Hmm.
the command, sending it to the bank to
Hmm.
say like transfer from this account to this other account. There's just sometimes where it's like super difficult to come up
I agree.
with a
Of
meaningful
course.
name here where okay, you call it some like pay-in service or something, let's say, and then if you figure something better out later, just change it.
Change it. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. We have
and
so
this
many tools in like the IDEs to kind of just change the class name, and they can do it
yeah,
like everywhere it's used. I mean, it's super easy to change a name. So
yeah.
no name should be sacred, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, you got to be careful about the consistency and all this,
Hmm. Hmm.
and make sure that you don't change something that, mm, yeah, messes up the consistency of the entire project.
Mm.
Um, and then also, I think sometimes you can have in a especially like an older uh, inherited uh, inherited project that you get,
Mm.
or like yeah service that you get, then you can have some sort of legacy naming as well, where it's like, oh, we always called it that.
Mm.
And there's a little bit of value in that. But I also think it's very scary to just say, oh, we gotta stay tied to this because we called it that 5 years ago and we haven't changed it in 5 years. I know there's a little bit of that. There's some value in having a name that has, yeah, people know it. But I still think you should. I think you should be
I
open
think I
to the
disagree
possibility.
there. I must admit. I mean, it might have made sense 5 years ago, but if it doesn't make sense anymore, change it.
No,
If the
I'm
team
saying that as
agrees it
well.
doesn't
I'm
make
I'm
any
saying
sense, let's change it.
I'm just saying like maybe you should consider, oh, if you want to have the consistency across the project, maybe you can add a little bit of weight to the side of calling it what the legacy is called because it is so well known. Because there will be a little cost there uh, when you have to adapt to the new one. But I'm definitely like mostly in your camp when it comes to this.
Yeah,
Like just give it the best name that you can. That is usually way higher value over
yeah,
time. And I think this is like this is the thing like on the long term I think is the most important thing when you're doing a longer term project, that you got to know that when you're coding, don't just think about what you know right now or in a like or tomorrow or something like that. Think about how does this make sense on the long term, because this is how it's going to be actually worked with.
mm,
um Again, like, yeah, if you have a mess that you can't understand when you're doing it, there's no mess, or it doesn't feel like a mess, but
right.
over time it becomes a mess and you can't work.
Yeah, and I mean, just basically, I think that's what you're saying as well. Embrace that naming is hard, right? So
Yeah.
if you're struggling finding the right name, go play a match of table tennis and come back. Discuss it with your teammates, right? What are we going
Yes.
to call
Yes.
this class? You know, take your time to actually kind of find that right name so that everyone is comfortable and that you choose the correct name so that you don't end up kind of starting the mess, right? That you're never going to fix.
I'm a big, yeah, big advocate of, yeah, just hash it out sometimes. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I've been known to go overboard sometimes with hashing things out, but I just really like f- figuring out things and becoming better in my thinking when it comes to naming, or it could be anything.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to the next one. Kind of the same ballpark here, but small functions. And I just found a small quote from Uncle Bob that said, "The first rule of functions is that they should be small. The second rule of functions is that they should be smaller than that." And for a big Fight Club fan, that's kind of funny because it's kind of leans a little bit to you do not talk about Fight Club. Second
And
rule
then
of
you
Fight Club
repeat.
is you do not talk about Fight Club. So it's kind of fun. So what's your take on this?
Um, Overall,
Just
completely
in general,
agree.
yeah.
Yeah, in general, I agree. It gives a little piece of code some functionality, but when like theory meets the real world, sometimes it can be difficult to make small functions without, like, sometimes you have a cost where, oh, I have to pass in too many parameters, or I have to get like several outputs, stuff like that. Sometimes you can, I will rather have a little bit of a longer function, um, with some like tight cohesion in there. But I think the general idea is super good, and I think you should always strive towards it because it just describes the code uh, in a neat way.
Yeah, yeah. It
Um,
should read like well-versed prose. I think that Uncle
right.
Bob
I
said that
think
as
it's
well, right?
yeah,
Like reading a newspaper article, basically, right? So you want to start at the top. Everything is pretty high level. This is what's going on, and then when you continue down the article in the newspaper, it gets more and more detailed and stuff like that, and kind of
yeah,
make sure that you keep the same abstraction level in the different functions, right?
and that's very hard. That
Hey, it's
is,
super hard, but
I mean,
extremely important
yeah, it's very
in my
important,
opinion.
and this is one of the things where, yeah, that is one of the more, it's deceptively hard. This idea of abstraction. Um, but one thing I want to mention about, like, for example, the small functions, like one of the sort of counter arguments I remember, maybe we discussed in the team, or maybe I had discussions later about this, but is, I think one of the counter arguments is, well, then when you're reading the code, then you have to jump around a lot in the functions. And my counter argument to that is always like, you don't have to. Like when you're reading a function that calls, let's say, calls three other functions, to know what the function does, given proper naming, you don't need to jump into the other functions. You can see what they're
Right,
doing right
right.
there on the name.
Going back to the
Uh,
meaningful naming, right?
right,
Super important.
right.
Yeah.
So it actually saves you reading the raw code that is harder to pass than just the,
Mm.
yeah, the English prose that you have as
Yeah.
the title.
Mhm.
But again, it requires the good naming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While preparing to have this chat with you, Lucas, I heard a talk with Robert Martin, and he had like a very interesting point. And I haven't actually tried it in practice yet because I was just listening to it this week. But he has this notion of that you should. We know that in our IDEs we have this possibility of extracting a function, right? So you can mark a few lines of code, press Control R M, I think, and then you can extract a function from that code so it gets
Mhm.
moved into its own function. So he has this idea that you should extract methods until you cannot anymore, right? So your methods should be like you shouldn't be able to look at a method or the lines of code in a method and like okay I can mark this and I can extract that. Do you know what I mean? Do you understand what I
Yes.
mean? I
Yes.
think that notion is really interesting. Actually, I want to try it out. Does it really make sense when you do it? Because that would
This is,
actually,
yeah.
if this is possible, then I will definitely try to do it because it would make sense. I think the main thing here is the naming. I suspect will be pretty hard when you get like at a very low level.
I think it's a nice, it's probably a nice thing to do as practice, I think. But again, when when you actually like hit the road, then then you find out that you're gonna have, you need to make methods that have a cohesive like functionality. So they have to be like, this function does this very concise thing. And you also have this other thing that I mentioned. Sometimes you can have a method where it's going to be very clumsy. It's going to have several inputs and maybe two outputs, and it's going to be just clumsy.
Hmm.
But that also, that depends on the way that you have coded before. Maybe sometimes refactoring can alleviate some of those issues, but I don't think it's that simple. I think it's probably a very nice practice to see like, okay, how much can I get away with? But I think, yeah, I think in reality it's more than that.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Would you say that indentations are a code smell? So if there's a lot of indentations in a method?
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah. Again, it's just harder to just this is very low level. Like it's harder to figure out like, oh, where am I in the tree of code? Um, so, but if you're doing like several indentations, like yeah, this often can be done with functions, with function calls, or you can it's very simple invert if statements and yeah.
Yeah.
But this is also one of the things that are something you can't likely can't just do out of the gate when you start developing. You need to get this deeper feeling for the code before this makes sense to you. Like all of these things um, are very. This goes with so much development that sometimes you just gotta feel on your own body what it feels like
Yeah.
to make these quote unquote mistakes. Like, oh, you have a bunch of indentation. Okay, I've done that before, obviously, when I started coding, and I just felt the pain of having to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and like I
There is
said in
no
the first,
substitution for experience, basically.
no,
There,
no,
that's just the way it is.
uh,
Right.
and that's how you learn, and that's just part of the process. And that's why
Yeah.
I'm like I'm saying, if you advocate for something, then you try it and you find out, oh, there was something that was very annoying about this that I didn't consider. Now I'm gonna say, let's never do this again, or at least let's make a big change to it, and let's try see if that alleviates the issue.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Let's move on to number 4, code comments.
Code
I
comments,
would say
yeah,
Robert Martin does not like code comments. Do
yeah.
you?
No, I think I'm a lot with them on this. I used to do them. I used to learn before I read the book. I learned that you can never have uh, too many code comments. But I think there was some very strong arguments in the book of why you can. And I did actually, when I then think back, on what some of the arguments were, for example, oh, these comments they will lie. They will not be held up up to the same state as the code, so they will confuse you. And when I thought back, like this is exactly what I have seen in the when I worked on the Messi project at my old job. This was exactly what I saw. So I could relate it back to there. See, that's actually completely true. I
Hmm.
experienced that. I so many times I read a comment, and that project was riddled with comments and also just out commented code and stuff like that.
Oh.
And yeah, there was so much where I was like, this just this doesn't apply at all. This is just something that was forgotten to be deleted, or maybe the code was changed without the comment was changed. So this is just very true, I think. So
Yeah.
now, like after I read the book, I switched over to like very rarely make comments. But I think over time I've adjusted a little bit. I still obviously want to make them as rarely as possible, because what he says is in the book is, if you need to add a comment, it means you have likely failed in some way to describe what is going on with the code, with the naming in the
Right.
code and the structure of the code. And
Mhm.
I completely agree there. Um, but I think it's also true that sometimes we gotta do some things that are a little bit nasty. Not often because something that is out of our control, like, oh, this third party that we are hooking into, they need things done in this weird way,
Yeah.
and this is just like, yeah, you can do your best, and you should do your best with the naming to make sure that that makes sense, but it's also just very likely that it doesn't really make a lot of
Yeah.
sense.
So basically,
uh,
like this XYC API that are out of our
yeah,
control requires ABC in the header or whatever. Yeah, I
yes,
agree. Obviously, that would make
yeah.
sense to kind of make a comment on that.
exactly.
But I think
And
like
but then
the quote that you were referring to from Uncle Bob is the use of comments is to compensate for our failure to express ourselves in code. And I really think that hits it on the nail on the head, right?
yeah,
Like if you need to do a comment on your own code, basically, I mean, something's up. It's a
yeah.
big code smell, in my opinion.
But this is here where it's important to uh if you make a comment in some, let's say you have some weird integration to some third party, you make a class that has that functionality in it, and you make a comment to explain something, some of the weirdness, but then this comment is wrapped in a method, it is tested, and it's wrapped in a method that has a nice name that is higher level than the weird weird code, and then you may never have to see that code again. And you may
Hopefully.
never have to look at that comment again, hopefully, yeah.
Mhm.
um, and now you have it like wrapped in a nice name. But I still think it's nice that if you need to look at it later, then the comment is there. But yeah, then you still always run the risk that the comment will not be kept up to date. This is just a question of discipline. A lot of stuff here also comes down to discipline, but I don't wanna I don't want something to just straight up rely on discipline if I can avoid it,
No,
because I'm very disciplined, maybe sometimes to the point of annoyance to some other
to some.
developers. um, but uh, yeah, but it's hard to rely on that. You should have a setup. Uh, you should try to get a setup where you are sort of forced to act in a good way.
Mhm. I
Um,
agree. I agree.
for
Like
sure.
I have two
Yeah.
pet peeves. I think one is never ever check in commented out code.
Yeah.
Delete it. It's in the
Delete.
version control. You do not
Yes.
have to comment. Fair enough if you're working on it, like doing like experiments or whatever.
Yeah,
But
on a branch
never
or
check in commented out code. It will never ever make sense, right? Because it's in the
yeah.
version control. So I you mentioned it just previously, and it's just like eek to me. I
Yeah.
hate it.
It's very.
Hate it.
I you have no idea how much code I just deleted it when I was working on the project because it was
Right.
just confusing me. I
Yeah.
didn't know if it was something that, I mean, if you have outcome in the code, the first thought you have is, well, this must be of some importance.
Right. Is it a
Uh,
mistake that it's still commented out, or should
yeah,
I? It's just
uh, it's yeah, and this is at the root of the thing, of clean code, is like eliminate as much of these like, hmm, what's going on
yeah, the
here?
double takes. Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think in the book, I really like this. He he has a rating of the quality of the code. Is like the fewer what the fucks per minute or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really like that because
Yeah.
yeah, I feel it's very a very good description.
Yeah. It's a good measure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And the other pet peeve that I have, and I'm not really good enough with that yet, but I the only place where I allow myself to use comments is actually I always try to add, the triple slash above a
The
class,
summary.
describing what is the responsibility of this class or interface. Even one, it kind of forces you to kind of consider, okay, is this class slash interface named correctly? Right, because I can see
Yes.
I'm describing
Yes.
now what the class
Yeah.
should do, uh, and if I have a lot of "and" in that, like, text, it's like,
Yes.
"Okay, is this class doing too much?" Right?
Yes.
And, like, the byproduct of this is that it's actually shown in the IDE, in the IntelliSense, right? So when you hover the class, it says, "Okay, this class will do this."
Yeah.
And I like that.
Yeah.
I'm not
Again,
I'm
you
not
still run
very
the
good
risk,
at,
right?
remembering it when I'm in the zone, but I definitely think when I do it, I appreciate it later on.
Yeah.
So
I've
when I
done it
get back to
before
the
as well,
class, it's like,
exactly with the
"Right,
same.
this is the what it's doing, nothing else."
Yeah. I've seen the exact same value as you're talking about there, where you're like, yeah, just this, the act of describing it reveals something. This is
Right.
why also I think discussion with other people, or like the classic rubber ducking, where you have an issue and you just, it happens like it's sort of like always set up as a little bit of a joke, but it works. Like
Oh yeah.
it's so crazy. Like if you actually felt insane enough to explain your problem to an actual rubber duck, I bet it would help you in many cases. But I don't think, like, I think I'm too sane to do that actually. But when you have a human that you can that you can describe it to, it just so often just comes to you what's going on.
Right. You know what I have
Um,
on on my desk? I've
oh, you're explaining it
Einstein.
to Einstein.
I explained it to Einstein. He's a clever guy. He's a clever guy. I'll
Was
tell
he
you
a good
that.
coder?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, oh, now I completely lost my.
Oh, sorry.
No, no, no. That's not your. No, that was not Einstein doing that. It was just. I think I went on a maybe a tangent, but no, I was saying, like, with the summary that you're explaining can be very helpful. But again, you still run the risk of, well, the the responsibility of the class may change. But if that happens, then you have bigger issues, I guess, because you should not just willy-nilly change the responsibility of a class. Then the name
No.
should likely change,
Yeah.
and yeah. Um, so yeah, then it comes down again, discipline, stuff like that.
Discipline. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I agree. Cool. Let's move on. Number five is error handling, and this can be a little bit of can be a little bit abstract to talk about.
Hmm.
So let's try to keep it at a high level, but I definitely think that it's worth mentioning because in all teams that I've been in, you need to have the talk. Got to have the
Yeah.
talk about errors, right? How are we going to handle it?
I'm still, like, I've been at mobile pay for 2 years, and we've discussed this from the beginning. And I'm still, like, completely uncomfortable in this discussion.
Hmm.
I I have ideas, and we have some stuff in practice, but I still don't feel like I've hit something that just feels completely right and just alleviates all my concerns. Um, I think does he specifically talk about this in clean code where he's against exceptions, or?
I don't remember. I have to
All
be
right,
honest.
but I really like at least the idea of, when you're writing code, that you sort of assume a happy path as the default. And then I like the idea, at least, that then if something completely crazy happens, that you throw an exception, just short circuit everything, and just say, we can't continue here. It doesn't make sense at all to continue. But that's not, for the first of all, it still requires you then to catch that exception somewhere. So you need to make sure that happens. I hate when it happens. Like, I don't think it should happen in the if you have classes that can throw exceptions, and you expect them to be caught, like, right when where the function that can throw the exception is called.
Mhm.
I super dislike that. When you have, then you need to have the try catch and this, so in that. So I think still um my best suggestion, and I think we're doing this in the team mostly, is, okay, if something goes completely apeshit, then we can do an exception, but we need to have, like, a very high level catch uh on that, on some, like, very big, like, oh, this just went completely wrong, try again, or something like that.
Right. Right.
um but otherwise, we used the result pattern a lot, and, like, that's the best solution so far. But it also comes with downsides. It comes with downsides because you have this. You need to make sure you handle all the cases every time you call a method, and you need to pass up some of the results that you get, and it's also annoying. Um, what do you think?
I think, as far as I remember, now it's been a while since I've looked at your code. I will soon again, so that's great.
Yeah.
But as far as I remember, like just for context, most of the backend code that we have in your team are APIs, so web APIs.
Yes.
So as far as I remember, we only have try catches if there's actually something that we can save, like deep in the code, or else we just let it pop up all the way to the controller. That would actually kind of say, okay, is this like a HTTP 400 or is it a 500 or whatever, depending on the exception. So almost the only code, as far as I remember, in the controller is basically like try catches. So like the different types of exceptions that can kind of come from deep down,
Yeah. But
and
usually we
we
also handle that with middleware instead. So it actually isn't visible in the controller. But
okay,
sometimes it is. But we wouldn't really do try catches around stuff like down deep in the code unless there's always exceptions. There's always exceptions, right? Um, if you have some third party thing where you want to make sure that you can handle an error, or if you have some, I think one of the cases where we started doing it a little bit, where if we wanted to do a bunch of things and if anything went wrong, we needed to make sure that we kind of rolled back. But I don't think what we're doing there is completely kosher. I think there's probably a better way of doing things like that, but that's the way that we found.
mm,
So we're doing like A, B, and C, and if anything goes wrong here, we want to make sure that we can actually maybe retry this flow another time. So we catch any exception there, reset reset the state, and then we actually just rethrow the exception so it can be handled on an application level, like on the
right,
controller level.
right,
Uh, yeah, but there are definitely probably better ways of doing this.
sure. But there's a reason why error handling is always a discussion in all teams, right? Because it's hard. It's
Yeah,
very, very hard. And I definitely think that you need to have like good guidelines in the team and good discussions about how we want to do that. So you kind of do it the same way everywhere, so that you don't in one component you do it this way, and in the other component you do it the other way. That's never good.
yeah, yeah. This comes with the again back to consistency, but this is not names. But again, consistency overall, I think, is very powerful. To just even across like different services that you have running, that you do things in a very similar way is just
Mm,
very helpful.
yeah,
You can just easily understand like, oh, yeah, if it's especially error handling because it's so hard to do
yeah,
well.
yeah. But I also think one thing that I find very important is actually it's not really error handling per se, but I think it's super super important that you do logging, do lots of logging, do like very very good logging, because like your future self will thank you when everything is on fire. It's so great that if you have like great logging, okay, so this went well, this went well. Oh, okay, now that so it says something in the log like this parameter was null or whatever, right? Like that
Yeah,
logging is just so important. Kind of
yeah,
it's boring to do, tedious
yeah.
to
It's
do as
often an
well when you're
afterthought.
coding, but it's so important. It will save
Yeah,
your life later.
we've unfortunately, like I think historically done it as an afterthought
Mm,
in the team. Um, because yeah, it's one of those things that only becomes a problem when you don't have it.
right.
And then there has been several cases where oh my god, we need logging here. Then we have to go in and add some logging and then rerun some tests or something and see what happens. Or
Mm,
and that's unfortunate.
yeah.
Again, then it's discipline because it's not fun. It doesn't really yeah.
It's not
Uh,
sexy. It's not
it's not
sexy.
sexy, no. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, good to have.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And also like kind of related, just experience as we talked about earlier, like the amount of times I've seen stuff break where is basically like methods where you return null in some path don't ever return null, right? If you have a situation where something might be null, then do it nullable instead, right? So that you can see in the signature of the method, you
All
might
right.
have null here, right? Never do
Oh
it
yeah.
like silently, never,
No, no.
right? And in the same
Uh,
way that you should never have a situation where you need to pass null into a method, right? Then do
yeah.
overloads
Yes.
instead if you actually
Yes.
have that
Yes.
situation,
Yes.
because yeah, null can f up your life bad.
And that's where I think also the result pattern comes in and is very very powerful. Just that excuse me, just yet that what you can expect from a method, like the expected functionality of a method or a function is just leads to just less errors, less misuse. Um, you should assume that whoever is using this method, which is like the U, is a moron. Like,
Yeah.
uh,
That's actually a good starting point.
yes, make it as foolproof as you can.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. All right, that was error handling. Number 6, testing and clean code. We talked a little bit about it earlier in the presentation. I'm definitely a fan of lots of testing, and I try to do as much TDD as
Oh,
possible.
can you
So
give me a
I
moment?
write a lot of
Sorry,
tests.
Stefan, can you give me just a moment?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm back.
All right. Great.
Yeah,
Life happens.
continue. Yes.
No worries. So yeah, what I was saying is I definitely try to write a lot of tests, and I know you have some very interesting viewpoints on that. But how much testing do you think is enough?
Well, this is also one of the topics where I'm very evolving. I don't have a solid feel yet, if despite so much time. I still see a lot of changes in my mind on this right now in the team, and you're gonna see this. We are actually testing out a new sort of paradigm in how we do testing. Um, we used to do a bunch of unit testing, so everything which is unit tested, like yeah, everything. And then we had also a layer of acceptance testing. So like, yeah, just the application is more or less a black box, and you throw something in and see what comes out. Um, and we have flipped it a little bit on its head because one of the challenges with having a lot of unit tests is that they are harder to maintain. And there are also ways to alleviate this, the harder maintainability. But um, basically, like a rule of thumb that we've started to try to use is if a class has a lot of dependencies. So, for example, one of those orchestrators that we talked about, then we would like to not unit test it. So more like those the finer detail stuff that is very easy to unit test without the use of heavy mocking. And then we make a little bit more like finer grained acceptance tests to get the rest. And I think it's less testing overall than we used to have back when you were there. But the upside is just the less maintenance. And yeah, so this is the paradigm like we're trying to see how it works.
Hmm. So the pain that you're describing with regards to maintenance of unit tests, that's interesting because wouldn't you say that if you were to actually change or maintain tests for a class, then you're probably violating the single responsibility principle, right? There should only be one reason for a class to change. So if you change something and like 15 tests suddenly fail, wouldn't that be a
Uh,
code smell?
Usually I would say yes, but here's the deal that if you have a class with a lot of dependencies and you have to mock these things out, then you can have a test where you're changing the exact implementation of how the class works. It's still doing one thing, it's just doing that thing in a different way.
Mhm.
And now you have to change a bunch of mocking to make sure that that thing happens correctly.
Mhm.
So the actual functionality, the end goal of the class is not changed at all, but the implementation has. And this is like basically my biggest challenge with unit tests is when you either directly or through mugging tie up unit tests with like into the exact implementation. Uh, so a more simple example would be like, okay, if I write a test that will see if I'm reading some data from a certain place, uh, this in my mind should not be tested at all. Like I think like the direct outputs from a function call, and then like I don't think you call them side effects, but like outside effects. So for example, if you put something into the database or something like that, or maybe you want to make sure that you make some call to some other some third party or something that needs to get some data from you or something like that. These things need to be tested, but anything that happens between these things should be avoided as much as possible, because these things can change where with the outputs still being the exact same.
Yeah,
So
agree.
this is, yeah. So then you can end up in a situation where you have tests that fail, but your system works exactly like it should.
Right. Okay. So this is
Yeah,
interesting because that was one of the things that we discussed, I don't know, a year ago or maybe even more, where you were like, you have a lot of test stuff and that's great, but a lot of these tests doesn't really show any business logic. I think was the wording that
yeah,
you used. And that's kind of what you're kind of referring to here. So when you do TDD, like the red green refactor pattern, it's always like, okay, I rewrite this test, it will fail. And what is the most simple way to make this test green, right? So and when you do this, I think the structure of the code really improves. However, you will get a lot of tests that would be uh, uninteresting with regard to the bigger picture, right? So
hmm
I don't know if you have a method called I don't know, call customer API or whatever. We're basically interested in, okay, do we call the customer API when the data is valid, right? And if it's
yes,
invalid, please check that we do not call it. We
yes,
don't want to test like, or that do we call the database once to get some data that
that
we
we
have
need to
to,
stand.
right? It's uninteresting.
Yes,
And that was really
and
a kind of a cool moment for me. It was like, oh yeah, I get that. I totally get that. Right? Do tests, do TDD, but clean up afterwards. Right? So
yeah,
so
yeah,
I think that, as I
because
said,
I
like
think,
the structure of the code is really good. It really improves if you do TDD because it really makes you think about the way that the components work together. But clean up the test afterwards so that you
yeah,
only test the real business logic.
yes, the actual outputs, and
Yeah,
outputs meaning both returned stuff, but also, yeah, outputs from within.
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know how
yeah, yeah,
to. I
yeah.
think side effects. I think we have called it side effects, but side effects is wrong because it's, yeah. Um, so that is, and here is the kicker, Stefan, is that uh, when you have mocking, it is explicitly a tie to some uninteresting internal implementation. This is the thing, right? If you have,
It can be, right? It doesn't have to be. It
now,
could
I mean,
be
some,
a
yeah, but for
dependency
example,
could
let's
be
say,
like a component that calls the third party API or whatever, right? Or the
yeah, but if
database.
you have your example, for example, okay, let's say we need to send some data out somewhere to some API, and we need to get it from somewhere, and let's say it's just the database. If you then you have a dependency on some kind of reader that reads from the database, and okay, you don't want to test that we read from the database. But when you create a unit test of that, then you need to mock out the read of the from the database, that is then sent to the API, and you're just testing that it's actually sent out, but you're mocking that dependency. And then if that dependency ever changes in its interface or anything like that, then the test break.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, but but the functionality will still work. Like you change the interface of this dependency, you go in, and obviously if that happens, you need to change the use of that interface inside
But
your
the only
class.
situation where you would actually kind of set up the dependency to do something specific on a read would be if you had some kind of interest in the object that is returned from the dependency, right?
Not always, because there's so many cases where you have to set up something that makes sense for further processing. Like
Mm-hmm.
you need some kind of valid state from some dependency. Like if you have a dependency where you just call avoid, for example, then you're totally right. Then it's no issue. You don't have to mark it out. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
can just happen automatically and all that. But if you need to use some kind of thing that is fetched, or you pass something in and then it gets turned to something else or something like that, then when you have a lot of dependencies, this will just become a crazy tangled mess that you need to spend a lot of time setting up, and then also uh, keeping up to date with any changes that happen in there. And if you had an acceptance test that tested the outputs here, or even something like integration testing that we are starting to dabble with, where these are not marked out, they are just actual real life instances,
Mm-hmm.
then you don't have this issue at all, and the maintenance just becomes so much less.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's why we try to see what happens if we cover these, like for example orchestrator stuff, which is the larger logic of the application, um, and even also things further down, we just cover it with the acceptance test, where we are way more like reliant on the actual state of an application.
Mm-hmm. So
So that
I'm
is
looking forward
the
to
takeaway.
seeing this in real life. I have to admit, because like my initial thought here is if you need to set up, like for instance, if you have a dependency that returns an object on a method call, right? And if you
Mhm.
need to set up what the object looks like in order to
Yes.
get like the right path, I'm inclined to say, okay, but then there's some business logic. But I'm not willing to go all the way to say that's my opinion before I have to look into it a little bit. I think I need to see some real code. But
Yeah.
that's my
Uh,
initial thought. I don't know. Do you have any comments on that?
I will at least say that we are still doing it. Uh, we are still doing it. It's just when it gets too much, then we just make sure that we have acceptance tests that try to hit some of the logic as much as possible. But we are
Hmm.
not. We are still doing unit testing, and we're also still doing unit testing with mocking, but we're just trying to limit it as much as possible. So, for
But
example, when you had the
are the acceptance tests not really complicated then? If you have to have acceptance tests that actually kind of gets all the different corners in the business logic.
that is where I think this is where I'm saying, like, we're still very much developing this and trying to dabble with, for example, integration testing. Like I would like a setup where we can kind of spin up an application, then pull out like a small section of the application, and then just kind of test that, where it's like basically it is like sort of real life, but you have your hooks into a very specific part of the system, and you don't have to just look from the outside perspective. But this is, again, like I said, I think I said this, or this was maybe with error handling, but it also goes with testing. This is an experiment, right? I
Hmm.
also said this when this was proposed in it was not my proposal, by the way, in the team. I said, let's try this out, because I'm very interested to see what are the pitfalls, if any, of this. Like you are saying here, right? Can we still make some unit tests that make sense? We're just gonna have to see. But
All
this
right.
is our current, yeah.
I'm looking forward
I'm
to
very
seeing this in real life for sure. But I mean, like, just a last remark here is that my experience is like the cheapest tests that you can do are unit tests, very fast to set up, and like acceptance tests are at the very top of that pyramid. They're very expensive, fairly expensive to do, so don't do as
yes.
much, right? So, but yeah, interesting approach to kind of, as you say, turn it a little bit upside down. That's interesting.
But I will say, I completely agree that, I mean, we're obviously not ever gonna have as many acceptances as we had unit tests. But an acceptance test in the best case scenario hits a lot of what a unit test would hit, obviously, but it cannot hit as many nooks and crannies. So I'm still saying, like, if you can unit test it, unit test it. Like, I don't think there's any reason to say, like, oh, this will be hit by an acceptance test, so let's just keep it as is. If you can unit test it, do it. It's
Hmm.
only if it's like difficult to unit test or very high cost, like maintenance high cost, that you should consider not doing it
Hmm.
under this new paradigm. In my mind, at least, this is what I'm when I'm doing code reviews and such,
Hmm.
um, because I'm still uh, uh, scared, I guess. I mean, yeah, will something fall through because of this? But I think it's a very interesting way of doing things that will maybe throw off some learning.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I think it's super important that you, as a developer or as a human being, even, I mean, be curious about other ways of doing stuff, right?
yeah,
Fiddle
not
around
fall into
and
that.
find
Yeah,
out, right? You might, as what you
exactly.
spoke about earlier, like doing something and argumenting for let's do it this way. Who knows, in a year, 2 3 4 years, you might find out, okay, now I see what the problem is here with that direction. Let's just kind of rewind a little bit and just pick another path, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And we also didn't go very destructive with this change in paradigm. Like we didn't just go, oh, now we're just gonna go like delete a bunch of unit tests. It was more like, okay, if you have a bunch of unit tests that are failing because they are some of these tests that are historically harder to maintain, then just delete them and do not replace them. I mean,
Mhm.
don't
Okay.
just do that. Consider if it's something that we do need tests on, or do need some specific acceptance tests to hit if we can.
Yeah.
Um,
So
but this is
basically
also
replacing the unit test with acceptance test instead.
right as it comes, right?
Yeah. Cool. All right. Interesting stuff. The last point that we picked is the Boy Scout rule. Um, and if you don't know, the Boy Scout rule is basically like, I think it's, was it like a rule from an old Boy Scout clan that they, each time they left a campsite, it has to be a little bit better than when they arrived. So, pick up some trash, build a new campfire or a new bench, or fix an existing bench or whatever. And basically what it does is translating that to code is always, if you see stuff in a method that you're like, oh, that could be a little bit better, just fix it, right?
Yeah,
Is that
this is
something
so
that you do in
powerful.
your everyday?
Yes. I mean, yeah. But I have I've had issues with doing it too much, but I've I think it's very important, and it's very powerful if the whole team is in on it, because that's the idea, right? It's the a lot of small things that just comes together now in a good way to just over time improve, because the reality is that it will over time degrade a little bit as well. You will make a little bit of a mess sometimes when you're coding. You should try to clean up yourself, but yeah, shit happens. And this will just ensure that maybe your entire project will actually improve over time.
Mm-hmm.
But it requires also discipline and uh, understanding of a wider part of the code to do it
Mm-hmm.
effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, no, there's
because
definitely like that. The challenge is to balance when is it just like a small cleanup, and when is it kind of too much, so that we're actually like we have it. Usually, we have a tight deadline, right, as a developer, and
mm,
and we have to kind of respect that. And sometimes cleaning up can kind of have like ripple effects in the system. So that, oh, I'm
yes,
just going to change just this one thing. Oh, then I just have to change this. Oh, okay. Now we have a new paradigm. Now we have to do
yeah,
this, and it kind of can really escalate. So that it's kind of that balance that's super hard.
yeah, yeah. It totally is. And in these cases, you have to recognize that as soon as you can, and then flag it for the team and say, I would like to make this improvement, but this is I guess the way that we need to do it. But it's also very hard sometimes to get some of that stuff prioritized in reality. And we're still trying to figure out how can we make sure that this is prioritized, because it is important.
Mhm.
Uh, this is the entire uh, discussion basically. Like, is it actually valuable uh, to have a code base that is nice to work in?
Mhm.
And sometimes you have a mess that stemmed from a poor understanding of the feature that you were implementing, or as in our code base, I know we have like two sort of different parts of one of the systems, and I have previously refactored one, and the other one has not been equally refactored to be consistent and equally as good. And this, I've seen other members of the team uh, like hit their head on this, or like stub their toe, because oh, this is not as good as the other thing, and now it's harder to do the thing I want to do. And even though I had flagged this as a task that should be done, it has not been done in a very long time. Even though I sometimes just like, oh, I think we should try to do this as soon as we can, and I'm just waiting patiently until that we can. Um, but yeah, but back to Boy Scouting, it's super cool if you can do it. Um, I think it's a no-brainer almost,
Yeah,
but you
I
gotta
think
you
that
gotta keep it
I
small.
definitely think that you are one of the people that I've worked with that are your eyes are always looking for small improvements, and I mean that in a very positive way. But I think one of the issues that I've seen you have, and we spoke a lot about this previously, is that it can kind of when you get like a big pull request, right? And then maybe
Yeah.
the changes that the feature that you actually implemented is maybe, I don't know, 5 files, right? But the pull request
Yes.
is 85 files because you just renamed a class to something better, right? And like I remember that we had the discussion. Okay, just if you find something that you need to rename a class that actually touches 80 classes, right? Just do one pull request for that, right?
Yes.
And just in
That's
the
that's a
message,
good
just
point.
do I just
Yeah.
renamed this class from this to this. It's
Yeah.
extremely fast for everyone to approve. Get that stuff merged in so that the actual stuff that you're doing, that the feature request that you're doing, will just be 5 code files, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And that's a good point, that you should still. I think stuff like this can still be done as Boy Scouting, in the sense that you should not just put it up as a task to be done later. You can do it now, but or in just a moment. But yes, do it separately,
Mm,
as to not clutter the actual thing that you want to make sure is good and can be reviewed very concisely.
Yeah.
Completely agree. And yeah, good point.
Yeah. So keeping the pull requests like very very
As
concise. It might
narrow as you
be
can.
many
Yeah,
files, but like the
yeah,
the change that you actually made is extremely easy to understand, right? If it's a rename,
yeah.
and even sometimes maybe if you see something in just a method, you're like, okay, this could be done a little bit more clever, but it doesn't really touch like the feature request that I'm implementing. Just do it in a separate pull request. I mean,
I
Git
think
can do
there's
so much stuff for you.
yeah, I think there's a fine line to walk here. I think um I like to sometimes I would still do it because there's also an overhead with doing the pull request and waiting for review and all this. And then sometimes you can, for example, get ahead of it by maybe just adding like a comment to your own pull request and saying like, oh, I just did this thing as a little cleanup thing. um, and when it is like a fairly small thing, but you still don't want it to be confused with the actual
Right.
implementation. This is
But
a
it's a
fine
fine
line to
line, I
walk.
think, Lucas, because
It's
if you
I
kind
completely
of go
agree.
down that path, uh, one small change here, one small there, one small there, and suddenly it's like
When
10
it gets
small
to that,
things that you did, right? So
yes,
it's always, but
when
I
it gets
totally
to
get
that,
what
I
you mean.
completely
I totally get it.
yeah.
Yeah.
It is a fine line. I do completely agree. But sometimes it's worth, especially if you get ahead of it and just say like, oh, this thing just kind of take it in isolation because oh god, making all the pull requests and waiting for review and all this can also just incur some extra time. And yeah, but it's a balance.
Hmm. Do you think there's any way that because I'm a big I really like the Boy Scout rule, I really do. But I think that it can sometimes be hard for teams to kind of really dig into. Do you think there's any ways that you can kind of encourage the team even more to do more Boy Scouting?
That's a very good question. um it's a very good question because I am so laser focused on these things. Uh, I sometimes feel I am a little bit alone in it sometimes.
Hmm.
So I would like the answer to this myself. um I, I think at least it's important to take responsibility of not just the thing that you're doing, but the code base as a whole. So so if you're working on some code and there's some adjacent code, or just like straight up it's in the middle of the thing you're doing, but
Hmm.
and it has at least to me fairly obvious small improvement you can make, and you don't make it, and then I will comment on it. And I will say like, hey, why don't you change this to this? It's a better name or something like that. And sometimes I could hear like, but I didn't touch that code, right? I just did the other thing around it. But yeah, but it's still your code. It's still our code.
Mm.
Um, and at least with one of my colleagues, he has told me that he is starting to slowly like get ahead of the things because he's a little bit annoyed that I mentioned so
Yep.
many
Mention
small
it.
things.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and he will, I guess, sort of say in his head like, "What would Lucas do here? Like, what would he notice and kind of scan it or something?" I don't know what he does exactly, but he will get ahead of these things sometimes now. Uh, that's kind of nice, but I don't know if it's true annoyance is the
Is it the
best
stick or the
course of
carrot,
action.
right?
So yeah, I don't know the answer to it.
No.
I wish I did.
But I definitely think, and I mean, this is just it's not only the Boy Scout rule, but in general, like I really like teams where I like to call it encourage failure, right? It's okay to do stuff wrong and learn from it, and be like public about it, speak out about it, so that the team kind of realizes, okay, I've done what Stefan just did, and I now see that's wrong. Do this instead, right? And I like to create a culture where kind of really take pride in your code and take pride in realizing when you did something wrong
Yes,
or fail
yes,
to do something. Is That's really good. That's a really good space to be in if you can kind of encourage that culture.
yeah. And this like you've mentioned with some other things, it's very good in your life as a whole. I think if you can just own your mistakes and like own up to your mistakes and analyze uh, your own behavior a little bit as you go to see what works and what doesn't. It's very good as a software developer, but also I think in general.
Yeah, in general as well. I
Yeah,
agree. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. All right. Any last thoughts on the Boy Scout rule?
I don't think so. It's
No.
very only small things. Please do it. Take responsibility for not just the thing you're doing, but the entire code base. Keep an eye out. It's very difficult. I mean, for me, it's simple because this is just how I work for some reason. But
Hmm.
I see that other people do not work in the same way. They just they have a tighter focus on the thing that they're working on,
Mm.
and there's some value to that as well, to not get distracted, right? Um, but uh, but if you can widen it a little bit, I don't know how to learn to do that. It's very difficult to change your
Yeah, but I
thought
think it's a
patterns like that.
process, right? It's not something that you learn from day to day. It's definitely something that kind of creeps up on you. As you said, you have
Yes.
a colleague that's kind of trying to get in front of the, like the
I don't want
annoyance
him to
of
mention it, so I will
now
just
he did it again. So I think
yeah.
that's super important. All right, great. I think we had some really good points here. That I've like while we've been talking, I've been taking a few notes or trying to kind
Yeah.
of for each point, I've tried to kind of distill like what I thought was the most interesting takeaway. So like with regards to kind of the number one, total cost of owning a mess. I think it's super important that you remember to take responsibility of your code. And with regards to the meaningful names, I thought you had a really good point about like being consistent in your naming. So decide, is it gonna be get stuff or fetch stuff, right? Is it
Yeah,
get
and
or is
talk
it
about
fetch?
it.
Super
Uh,
important. Yeah,
Yeah,
talk about it.
yeah,
Agree in the team. This is what we
yeah.
do. This is what we
Some
call it.
people will say like this doesn't matter at all. This is just one name. But I do think it matters.
It does
But
matter because it
it's hard
will.
to see it because
Yeah,
it's on the longer term you will see the return on investment.
yeah, I agree. And it will require a second take if you kind of mess this up, right? And kind of that's what we want to kind of avoid. And with regards to the small functions, we spoke about keeping the same abstraction level in the methods, and that it's super hard. But I think it's really important that you kind of try to take that step back and kind of realize, okay, I kind of
Yeah, I think we could maybe have defined this a little better. This is because this is very difficult topic. Like what is abstraction level and yeah, it's it's hard to even describe. It's something that I'm
it
still
is.
only at the
I,
point
I
where I
think
have a
I think you
feeling,
need
right?
to look at some code to really kind of
Yeah.
understand it, right. That might be an interview for another day,
Yeah.
digging into like the abstraction level stuff, because I think that's it is super hard, and I struggle with it every day for sure. Like
Yes.
getting back to some code that I wrote yesterday, I'm like, oh, okay, this could be better, right? Boy Scouting.
Don't be afraid
Don't be
of
afraid, right? And then with
tweaking your
regards
thing.
to the code comments, I think we can all agree to never ever check in commented out code. Just don't do it. Delete it. The source
Yes.
control system has it, so don't worry about it. And error handling, I have never return null, never pass null. That is definitely a big code smell because it will come and bite you in the ass sometime in the future. So don't do that.
Yeah.
Then with regards to testing, keep tests that verify business logic, not the nitty gritty test coming from TDD.
Yeah.
And I
I
think
would I would
that's
specify that a little bit by saying like tests that are implementation specific.
mhm.
Um and keep it to like yeah, business.
Yeah. So business logic. That's what I was trying to
Like
kind of.
the
I've been trying
outside
to kind
or
of boil
more
it down,
say
right?
like the outside of like stuff that is around the thing you're testing, and
Yeah.
try to avoid to be specific about the things inside.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also a thing where it's like, but why? Like you need to experience this a little bit yourself, maybe, and you will, because when you start doing tests, you will definitely do this.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, and then you will experience, and hopefully you will think of this and say, now I see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the Boy Scout rule, like the basic refactoring slash renaming, that's just one pull request, right? It's easy to approve for everyone. Like I just renamed this class from X to Y. Everyone can approve that in like 2 seconds, and it's super easy. But like the hard part of the Boy Scouting rule is when is it its own pull request, and when is it just fine because I'm just working in the code while I'm implementing the feature request
Yeah,
that I'm working
and
with.
even harder part, I would say, like, is the actual just having a little bit look around when you're at the campground, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
spot the actual garbage that is lying there, and don't just focus on your campfire, right?
Yeah, and also embrace that you can't fix everything,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Just fix one. If it's better than it was before, you're done. That's fine. You
Yes,
don't have to
yes.
fix everything, right? Yeah. Cool. Super interesting conversation, Lucas. And as expected, you had a lot of interesting viewpoints for sure. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing. I have one
I'm
last thing
glad.
before we sign off, just to kind of end on a more easy note. I have a small segment that I like to call bug fix or feature. So
Okay,
I'm gonna show you a few statements or whatever you want to call it, and then you just have to tell me, is that a bug fix or is it a feature? All right.
okay. I'm not sure I completely understand the format, but here we go.
I think you'll understand pretty quickly. So the first one. So your IDE plays a random meme sound every time you fix a syntax error. Would you consider that being a bug fix of the IDE, or is it a feature that you have to kind of enable?
Uh, Wait. I think I'm unsure of the format now. So is it a bug? I mean,
Do you
I
think
would
it's a
definitely think
bug that your IDE does not play a sound, a meme
that it
sound when
does
you fix a
not play a
syntax?
sound.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That is a. Uh, I think it's a feature. Yeah,
But you would definitely enable it, right? Like just the pure
not so
satisfaction of
sure.
getting a yay, you fixed something.
Maybe as a gimmick a little bit,
Maybe it's a gimmick.
and
Maybe you
then I
get
will
tired of
probably get
hearing it.
tired of
Yeah,
it.
depending on the sound, right?
Yeah, which meme?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I should have a list of memes.
yeah. Okay, your code linter starts inserting sarcastic comments when you violate best practices.
Oh, this is definitely a bug fix.
That's a bug fix. Yeah, I knew you would
Yeah,
go bug fix on that one.
yeah. That would be really cool.
Yeah, someone should build like an AI robot that could do that. That could be fun.
Yes. Do you really want to do this?
Yeah, but I don't know. Would it actually encourage you to break some best practices just to have a good laugh
Oh,
about the code linter's comments? I don't know.
that's a good question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And this one is especially for you. Every commit over 200 lines triggers a Slack message warning your team.
That's also a bug fix. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Just for context, Lucas has a reputation of sometimes having rather large commits
I will
or
say
pull
I've
requests.
gotten very, very sharp on this. You will see when you
Great.
start back in the team. But I did have like, I think I broke my record not too long ago, but it was something like it was something I don't even remember what it was, but I was definitely like 120 files or something like that. And it was some things, and it couldn't be basically. I mean, it couldn't be really split, and it was just one thing I was doing.
Yeah.
Um, so it was totally accepted in the team, but it was still fun to make jokes. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
also mess with the other team members when they do it from time to time.
Right. You have to laugh about it, right? We
Yeah,
all
yeah.
do it. We all do it. Yeah, yeah. All right. Last one. If you forget to push your branch, bring cake to the team.
bug fix.
Bug
Yes.
fix, right? We all love cake.
Yeah.
We all love cake.
Actually, we did make this sort of this change in the team. If you don't like, we want continuous delivery, right? So if you push something to main and you don't actually deploy it uh,
Good,
with certain caveats, you have to bring cake. Yeah. Oh,
good.
actually, you have to roll the dice, and if you're unlucky, you bring cake. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a dice involved as well. Okay, good.
Yes.
I love it. I love it. All right. I think that was a show. I think lots of great points, Lucas. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed it too.
I actually, yeah, I was quite anxious about it, but I thought it was super interesting. But that's just, I mean, I just love talking about programming,
Yeah, and that's
and
why I
especially
wanted you on
about
the
clean
show
code.
because
Yeah,
I know that you love to talk about it and you have a lot of opinions.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it was very, very fun. Uh, and now you also like, and the extra silver lining is that you know a little bit more about what you're getting into next week.
Yeah,
Uh,
I look
so.
forward to it. All
But
right.
thank you so much
Well,
for having me on.
yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure, my friend. Okay, well that's it for this episode of the Code Chameleon podcast. I hope you join us next time when I will hopefully have a guest that is just as exciting as Lucas was. Lucas, thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you next time.